On October 21st and 22nd, join indie podcasters from all around the world at the 5th Annual Afros and Audio Podcast Festival, the first two-day conference for and by Black indie podcast creatives and audio professionals. This year's conference will be held at the Reginald F. Lewis Museum in downtown Baltimore, Maryland, or virtually on the Hoover Event app for exclusive online sessions. Stay with us at the Renaissance Harbor Place Hotel and experience 2 days of panels, workshops, networking opportunities, and live entertainment for aspiring, new, and established podcast creatives. Don't miss one of the most anticipated events in the podcast industry, committed to community and collaboration since 2019. Learn more and purchase your tickets at afrosandaudio.com. See you there.
Welcome back to another episode of Q Points Podcast, dropping the needle on Black music history. I am DJ Sir Daniel.
And my name is Jay Ray, sometimes known by my governments as Johnny Ray Cornegay III. What's happening, good people?
Jay Ray, I am super excited for this episode of Q Points because it's always fun when we have a guest on board. And this gentleman is a very learned and very cultured individual, and I'm super excited to chop it up with him as we discuss the beans and toast crowd across the pond in it. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
We got to talk about the influence that the UK has had on us individually, and of course the music industry as a whole. We're going to talk about a time when the music industry was not depressed about having stars like it is now.
Yes.
But Jay Ray, let's please remind the people about how they can keep in contact with us and learn about all things Q Points.
Listen, y'all are here with us, and one of the easiest ways that you can support Q Points is by hitting the subscribe button. So whether you are watching us on video or whether you are listening to the show, wherever you are, click the subscribe button and click the notification bell so that you can be notified whenever Q Points has a new show. If you are like, listen, I like those guys, I want to support them, I want to make sure that the lights stay on, that you see all these LEDs back here. Sir Daniel is like got the solid gold lights, I got these little red joints. If you want to keep the electric on in Q Points land, you can become a member on our website at qpoints.com. Just go over there and click the subscribe button. And what you can also do, and this is free, you can join our mailing list at magazine.qpoints.com. Yo, we be having a good time over on that mailing list. Just be like dropping gems. So as y'all know, we did our House Music Divas show. So if you were on the mailing list, you would also know that we dropped songs from House Music Divas that we didn't talk about. But you would know that if you was on the mailing list. And the very last thing is you can also shop for merch in our store at store.qpoints.com. And you can be fly because it's about to be fall, so you can get you your hoodies because it's about to start getting chilly. We have an amazing guest that is joining us, and I'm going to read his bio because it is amazing and brilliant and meaty. Jason Randall Smith's longtime personal passions involve music appreciation, sonic curation, and media preservation. While attending the State University of New York at Albany, he volunteered at WCDB Albany 90.9 FM, hosting several radio shows as a DJ and producing promotional spots for the station. As a writer, Jason penned music reviews and long-form articles for Impose magazine, as well as podcast reviews for the AV Club's Podmass column. In addition, his poem, A Lesson in Deterioration, was included in the book Soul Babies, Black Popular Culture and the Post-Soul Aesthetic by Dr. Mark Anthony Neal. Jason is the host and producer of Radio BSOTS, Both Sides of the Surface, a podcast championing independent and Creative Commons music in a variety of genres since August of 2005. August of 2005, y'all. Okay. He is currently the music director at Bondfire Radio in Brooklyn, where his curatorial duties help shape the sound of the station. Radio BSOTS has been broadcasting live on this station since February of 2015. Folks, welcome to Q Points, Jason Randall Smith. Hello.
Welcome.
Mama, I made it. I made it.
How you doing?
I'm feeling blessed and highly favored right about now. Thank you so much for allowing me to join you both, distinguished gentlemen and wonderful curators of content representing Black music history and culture. I can't say that I'm one of the day ones, but I've been watching and listening long enough to know that when it comes to guests, y'all don't just let anyone into your house.
Yo,
thank
you so much. We are grateful to have you here. As you know, we are fans of your show. And Sir Daniel, I think I said this. I was like, yo, Jason is like the American Gilles Peterson. I just want you to know. Gracious. I just want you to know that you are in that canon. Like,
heavy.
Did I not say that?
Heavy.
Like, I was like, he's like the American Gilles Peterson. Like,
boy.
So I wanted to say that on the air because we're about to go to the UK, and Gilles for me was one of those folks that introduced me to so many things, and so I just wanted to say that to you, just in case no one's ever said it. That is the path you walk, and we grateful. That's why we so honored that you came to Q Points. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Huge honor. Thank you. For real. Thank you.
So as J. Ray said, we're blessed to have Jason with us to do this discussion, because I have been, and J. Ray, I've told you this, I've been enamored with the UK since I was a child, and I'll tell you all later why. But we cannot discuss UK soul and UK hip hop without acknowledging what is affectionately known as the Windrush Generation. Mm-hmm. So if you're not familiar, the Windrush Generation, between 1947 and 1970, nearly 500,000 West Indians migrated from their homes to Great Britain for better opportunities. And so, of course, when they migrated from Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, all those places, they brought with them a canon of music included calypso, reggae, ska, and of course, there's the Latin influence as well. And so at that time, the Brits were really into big band and swing. So naturally, when you get people start mingling together, the music starts mingling together and you get these fusions. And so what you have there are the roots of dub step, of jungle, of drum and bass, trip hop. And that's going to be a whole nother episode. So please stay tuned for that. But this is the nexus of UK soul. This is where artists like your Boy Georges and your George Michaels and Phil Collins, that's where they got their influence. You know? And so that's where we have to start. You know, J. Ray, coming up with the show, J. Ray and I started talking about how do we get connected to the idea of UK soul. And it was those gentlemen were some of the reasons why I felt an affinity to UK soul. Your George Michaels, Culture Club, Phil Collins, the Eurythmics, you know, on. And all of those white rockers of the early 80s is how we got connected to UK soul.
Yeah, that is it's so interesting. Where the UK, I feel like there's this lovely symbiotic relationship that feeds on each other between kind of US black music here in the United States as well as in the UK, because one of the things when we watched the Little Richard documentary, remember Little Richard went over there to London and like them kids was passing out You know, like they had never seen anything like it. And then Little Richard, of course, influences Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, and then Tina Turner, the same thing.
Beatles.
The Beatles, right?
Yeah.
All of these folks went over there, and these folks in the UK was like, oh my God, more. And then the reggae, the ska, etc. But I will say, and Jason, I'm curious about this for you. I know that for me, definitely those artists, I'm thinking of the Human League in the early 80s.
Yeah.
That really was like, oh, I love what's happening there. The Boy Georges, etc., the George Michaels. What I was most attracted to too about some of the Black artists that we're about to talk about is I did feel like for the first time we saw Black people doing Black music versus white people doing Black music or a version of it. And that was really interesting to me. And but I echo Sir Daniel. My first kind of introductions were those early 80s white rock pop hybrids. And for you, what was your earliest connection, Jason, to some of the UK soul and R&B stuff?
Starting to think about artists like UB40, Level 42.
Something About You is one of the dopest jams ever.
Ooh, yeah, that Lessons in Love.
Oh my God.
Yeah, just I mean, they've got a legacy. Shout out to them. Shout out to them. Going a little further on in history, Swing Out Sisters close to me. Swing Out.
Now, you know how I feel about Breakout. You know
Breakout
how I feel about
is
Breakout.
one of the great. Listen, Swing Out Sister. Okay, so I have so much of their catalog. Like, Swing Out Sister, yes, they have
Swing
a
Out
live
Sister.
album from like Japan. It's crazy. It's crazy. Anyway,
Susie and the
For as much-
Banshees and all of that.
Woof, woof. Yes,
And Simply
yes,
Red.
yes.
Don't forget Simply Red.
That's another one. That is another one. In terms of Swing Out Sister, though, for as much as Breakout and Twilight World got played and put in heavy rotation, if you was in New York and you was listening to the smooth jazz bastion that was CD 101.9, you got put onto a joint called After Hours. After Hours off that first album, right up there with Breakout,
yes.
right up there with Twilight World.
Yes.
After Hours, excellent cut. That's one of them sleeper joints on that first album. That and Communion.
So we were talking earlier about the Caribbean influence on the UK soul, and as kids in the 80s, Gen Xers growing up, kids in the 80s, I don't think another group had a heavier impact on me. Of course, we had New Edition over here in the United States, but when Musical Youth came through, I mean, and they cut through so sharp with that high pitch, that pre-adolescent voice, and these boys are playing their own instruments and they're hanging with like major ska bands and whatnot. They came through and really turned it around for me. Of course, Unconditional Love is my absolute favorite song by them, which of course is a duet with Donna Summers. Well, it's actually her song, I think about it. It's her song, but they add an element to it that is so phenomenal. They've of course been sampled time and time again in hip hop. And I don't think you've ever seen another child-based or youth-based group come out of the UK to have as much of an impact as they had on us, especially us here in the States at the time.
Yeah, that was true. That I remember seeing the Pasta Duchy video on MTV. This was probably, well, no, because it was post Michael Jackson, because that was kind of when they started finally playing Black folks. But and that was interesting, right? Because I think for me that was some of my earlier introductions to like reggae. Because up until that point, I was very familiar with rock, soul, R&B, pop, but there wasn't as much reggae that was listened to. And so Musical Youth introduced me there. So not only was it these young black kids that was like kids like me, but they were also playing a style of music that I was unfamiliar with and curious about. But they cut, to your point, Sir Daniel, they cut through and really did, I think, open up the minds of Americans as to what black folks in the UK were doing.
In the terms of R&B, like Jason, I know you got a 5-star song in your pocket that you like. You got to have a 5-star song that you like.
The funny thing was, 5-star for me was like 5,000 brain cells ago. So 2 days ago, I'm on YouTube going through songs, right? I'm just like, 5-star, 5-star. Why don't I remember 5-star? And then I fall on the video for All Fall Down. I'm like,
yes.
That's it. That's the one.
You know, I hesitate to say this, but they were like the UK answer to the Jackson 5.
They were, and they were built that way. I mean, that was how they were really introduced to us here in the United States, right? Was you have this family band. They had the same, they were adopting a similar look. So Jason, like you, before I travel internationally, people felt like I traveled a lot. And I'm like, well, I kind of developed my worldview from music. And it was these groups like 5-Star that started to introduce me to hey, black folks in London, in the UK, everything was London to me then. In the UK are doing things, right? But one of the groups that we have on our list as well, I got that debut album right there. Misha Paris, showed up in the late 80s. Listen, that woman sings down, friends. And my One Temptation is one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. And I still play that song like it's new.
Jason, do you recall, of course you remember Video Music Box. Video Music Box, J. Ray, you brought up MTV earlier, but I think Video Music Boxes was really those of us living in New York, in the tri-state area, was really our window to a lot of these artists, because that's where I first saw Misha Paris's My One Temptation video.
For me, yeah, I mean, Uncle Ralph all day. Uncle Ralph McDaniels all day. I mean, what he did for us at that time and what he did for so many artists to get put on. I mean, if you were in New York, if you're getting played on Mr. Magic, if you're getting played by Red Alert, your videos on Video Music Box, you can die happy after that. Right. As far as those artists were concerned, you made it. And he had such an incredible mix of music that he was able to really take us on a journey on a national scale as well as an international scale. And the fact that he was able to do that independently, public access, is still just the most amazing thing to me.
That's hot.
It's an amazing thing to me. The Misha Paris joint that I'm thinking about is If I Love You Tonight, the Prince joint.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Prince Pen joint.
Oh my goodness. And I know this is outside of our years, but Jason, I know that the Black Angel album, it's late 90s. The Black Angel album by Misha Paris, folks, I think it's available on streaming in the US. Go stream it. Like, it's still hot right now. Like, it's still hot right now. Produced by a bunch of DJs. It's just like UK soul on steroids. It's great.
Okay.
And so we can't discuss impactful R&B groups out of the UK without talking about Loose Ends. And J. Ray, I see you got it right behind you. Loose Ends in all their forms
Right.
kept giving us nonstop heat. But like, so Jason, I spin at a spot on Sundays for the dinner crowd, right? And I will throw on a Loose Ends joint. It still sounds fresh.
Mm-hmm.
The music still I know it's older. I know because I was there, but it sounds fresh. It sounds grown and sexy. It's enough groove that you're definitely tapping your feet and bopping along, but there's something still sexy and seductive about it. And it's like they tapped into the R&B, the sexuality of R&B, the sensual side of R&B, like no other, in my opinion. And those joints still get samples. What was your take on Loose Ends?
Absolutely adored them. They're unfadable. Unfadable. Hanging on a String will always be a joint. Slow Down will always be a joint. I still have the single of Don't Be a Fool.
Hot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they stayed consistent. Even with all the changes and all of that, they just, musically speaking, they continue to stay true to what they were all day.
Yeah. All day long. It's so funny. And Mariah Carey, the queen of remixes, I still think, and I've said this, my favorite Mariah Carey remix is the Stay, the remix to Stay with that uses
It's a Stay a Little While Child.
Stay a Little While Child, and it's the My All Stay a While Child remix, the dopest remix ever, and it's because of that foundational record.
Nick Martinelli again, Hanging on a String. Nick Martinelli produced that song. We got to do a whole show on Nick Martinelli at some point. Straight out of Philly. Listen, but in the chat, Carlton and Mark have both dropped Mr. Bachelor. Mr. Bachelor is such a joint. And by the way, this record, the Real Chucky Boo, was mastered as one of those continuous listens where every song blended into the other one. Crazy. So yeah, Jason, you were right. Loose Ends stay consistent. Even those joints that weren't hits are still mainstays. So I think of You Can't Stop the Rain, which is one of the most important ballads in R&B, wasn't a hit. Well, I don't think it even was a single for them. But I promise you, if you turn on The Quiet Storm, you're going to hear that song. And they just got it. They just had it. And those records were consistently solid.
Jason, we also cannot talk about such a major influence and a major footprint that Soul to Soul left in our brains and our hearts. So Jerry and I could talk on a nauseum about Soul to Soul, but I want to hear about what Jason Randall Smith's like your perspective on Soul to Soul. Like, where were you when you first heard that? That underlying beat, because that beat changed hip hop as well. So Jason, tell us about what that moment was like for you when your head was cracked open when you heard Soul to Soul.
For me, probably, I mean, it really did start with Keep On Moving for me. I love the shuffle of that song. I love the strings. Karen Wheeler will always be one of those vocalists that I hold in very, very high regard. But actually, just getting that album and sitting with it, it's one of the no skip joints. They said club classics and meant it. you have any, I mean, have we really considered the gumption, the gall, the unmitigated audacity that it takes to name your debut album Club Classics?
I never thought of that.
Volume
but you're right.
1.
Volume 1. It's like, oh, we gonna hit you again. Hold on.
Yeah, we gonna hit you with more. The Funky Dreads ain't done. We ain't done yet. And that's, man, I mean, Back to Life is a beautiful song to begin with. But to hit us off with that acapella, which just keeps showing up.
Yeah.
It just keeps showing up.
Jason, it's a DJ's dream.
It is.
Beat breaks and it
It's a
really,
DJ's dream.
you know, it really did. Yeah, it just, it's a whole mood, as they say. I mean, that really is a whole mood. So yeah, I mean, I was right on. I was right on the Soul to Soul train when that dropped, but I don't think people talk about Volume 2 enough. 1990, A New Decade.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful record and a wonderful follow-up, and not a sophomore slump in any way for me. Give a Life was a great way to start off.
Yeah.
I think
Love
Volume
Give a Life.
2, yeah, I think Volume 2 is the album that introduced me to the saxophonist Courtney Pine. The joint Courtney blows. That cut. And a cut like Time Untitled, like what that is as an instrumental groove. I mean, that's just them in the pocket. I mean, you just had so many wonderful people. It's Jazzy B, it's Nelly Hooper, it's Dobie, who, if you really want to talk about a connection between UK soul and hip hop, you look no further than a dude like Dobie. He's one of those people who was, hanging with Jazzy B and them, but also in the trenches as far as seeing who was going to be next in UK hip hop, who were really finding their voices. Because I think for a while, for a while that connection was always there, but how it necessarily translated over to us was different. And I'm sure, we're gonna talk about it when we get to UK hip hop, but I'm sure there were a whole lot of guys who felt like they had to come on the mic with an American accent in order for us to get it. It's like, it's like being here in the States and not wanting to mess with something with a different region because it wasn't from New York.
Right.
Now you flip that into an international context, right?
Right.
And once, once MCs over there said, nah, we got to put our stamp on it for real. The accent, what our cities, what our communities are about. If I come to this microphone, it's like, if I come to this microphone, you're going to hear Cockney, you're going to hear Brixton,
Right.
you're going to, it's got to be what it is. And that's the beautiful thing about hearing something like Jazzy's groove.
Yes.
Yeah.
You hear what it is, and he's telling the story, and after hearing him tell the story, you just wanted more of a happy face and a thumping bass for a loving race. And you figured Jazzy B and them were the ones who were going to bring it.
Yeah.
And he's still bringing it. One of the shows that I listen to over on Mixcloud is Jazzy B. Whatever I need to pick me up, I'm listening to him. Man, the volumes, it doesn't begin and end with Club Classics Volume 1. It's the one that's probably the most unfadable out of all the volumes, but there are more gems, so many more gems after that.
Can I just throw this one out there? Speaking of Volume 2, one of the most beautiful songs on there for me, and I wish that people here in the States like really were up on it, was Missing You. And that featured the
Yes,
vocals
Lord.
of Kim Mazel, who dope
Yeah.
on her own, a
Mhm.
vocalist on her own. But that song, there's a part in it where it's just the strings are just it's just strings, and there's like a pregnant pause and a build up. You guys have to, if you have not listened to Soul to Souls Volume 2, what's the reason? The meaning of life.
Mhm.
That song, the debut single from that song, and Missing You. You gotta check out that Volume 2 album. I think, you know how we do here in the United States when it comes to product from overseas, especially, we get into it, we love it for that moment, then we start, manufacturing our own thing,
Right.
and we kind of were like, okay, I'm over that. Let's move on to this next thing. But what I love specifically about the UK is how they were able to toe that line between what we knew as hip hop and, of course, what we know as soul or R&B. And people, they weren't afraid to be hybrids.
Right.
And so, one of the coolest people on the planet is Neneh Cherry.
Right. Straight, we know she is, of course from Sweden, but she has a whole UK foundation too, and she of all I have such a connection to Neneh Cherry. Like I have when when Buffalo Stance hit. I remember when that song hit specifically. And it was I couldn't remember a time where I felt like there was a rap song that was also a pop song. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, this is like a rap pop song. I don't think I'd ever heard like that before. It was either hip hop or it wasn't. And I felt like for the first time I saw something that was different. But then as you started to get into other songs like Man Child, and you start to realize that there's all these other influences happening with this woman, um it just was one of the best things ever. And I think she definitely is one of those artists that to this day I still follow because of all of the influences that she melds into the music. And an interesting thing, by the way, about Neneh Cherry is somewhere in this room, I have the first song that she appears on. And it's like this ska joint from like 1981. And it's the first song that she appears on. I think I did a black music mixtape on it, actually. And if I did, we'll put it in the description. But yeah, she was just over there in London just kind of doing stuff. At a very young age, but ultimately creating what I consider to be some of the most important and transcendent music of the period, especially when we look at the late 80s.
Neneh Cherry, unreal. Singing background vocals for the Slits when she was young, touring with them. I mean, one of the most formidable, influential punk bands, all women. And after that, she's in this, it took me maybe 1 or 2 decades after something like Raw Like Sushi dropped to understand just how deep she was musically.
Yeah.
Between singing for the Slits and then being in this post-punk band called Rip Rig and Panic. Like, I didn't even know anything about that until long after the fact. Being the stepchild of Don Cherry doesn't hurt either. So,
Right.
I mean, so her cool factor was all the way up long before Buffalo Stance gets released as a single.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's a moment.
So we're coming to the end of this particular segment because I feel like we're gushing right now about our love for for the UK R&B side of things, but we got to definitely talk about the hip hop side of things. But I cannot move on from this segment without asking you two gentlemen something. And this might be one of those controversial questions, but does Sade belong in this conversation, or were they too pop? And remember, we got to keep thinking Sade is a band. I know we're used to thinking about Helen. We're thinking about Helen when we hear Sade, right? But Sade, we're talking about a whole band as a band and their body of work.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason, I'm curious about your thoughts. I actually think they should be included in these conversations. Because they did a couple of things. I think they broke through. They were performing Black music, and they broke through at a time when they were just doing something totally different than everybody else. When they broke, like, it was totally different. They looked different. They sounded different. And so, and also they were marketed really different. So that's why I'd also think that we leave them out a lot, is because, yes, they were this band with this Black front woman and doing a whole thing, but they were kind of marketed to, I think, the rock, super cool, post-punk crowd. And it all won. Like, it fired on all cylinders. But I think we do Sade a disservice by not putting them in the conversation when we talk about UK soul and R&B, because they were really important to the movement really becoming big here in the United States. So that's my thought.
First off, shout out to Carlson in the chat for shouting out Sweetback, because if you talk about, listen, if you talk about whether or not Sade it can be included in this conversation, you're ultimately talking about whether or not Sweetback can either.
Right.
ultimately. But I fully agree. I fully agree with you, Jay. I fully agree. There's always going to be a place for them within the UK soul conversation, simply because at a certain point, they kind of take over the conversation with just how big they got with hit after hit after hit after hit after hit. But ultimately, they were never just a band that was about the singles. Mm-hmm. It's not just they don't simply live in a singles context. Yeah. They are the full body of work. They are the entire discography. That is an album-oriented group. And maybe it depends on the people that you talk to in regards to whether or not Sade belongs in it, because maybe there are going to be people who focus more on those who didn't necessarily get that kind of a shine. Maybe there are going to be people who focus in heavy on some of those people that came up when that whole acid jazz movement was coming up. Mm-hmm. That's a whole other crop of UK artists to talk about. But Sade definitely belongs, because when you're talking about UK soul, I'm thinking about joints like Nothing Can Come Between Us. That's a soul joint for your heart. That's a soul joint for your heart. I still smile when I think about a cut like Maureen. Still smile. And let's just put the whole Love Deluxe album down on the table. I mean,
Trump's everything is like, oh, we made Love Deluxe.
Cherish the day forever.
Right.
Forever. It's like, are we really going to talk? It's like, do we have time to talk about how many deep house bootleg remixes got made out of pearls?
Right. And so Lection did like a whole Sade reimagining. Like, come on.
you get no argument
their
from me.
influence. Yeah, I mean their influence is bigger than soul, but I don't think you can really have the conversation and not give them serious consideration for everything that they've done and continue to do.
Yeah. We're up against the break, and I want to shout out our folks that have been listening to us live and that are going off in the chat right now. Our day ones, Carlton, Mark, and of course they brought up Lisa Stansfield. Now, Lisa Stansfield came along at like the right moment when we were in that. Soul to Soul came along and did what they did and kicked the door open and was like, oh, by the way, this is what we're doing here in the UK. And then we also have this Blue-Eyed Soul. We're bringing back the whole Blue-Eyed Soul movement. Yeah. And Lisa Stansfield, there was a time when people really didn't know that she was white, because
for real,
for a long time, I remember hearing the record "Been Around the World" on a pirate station out of Tampa, Florida. They would always play it towards the end of the night after playing loads and loads of hip hop. They would play Lisa Stansfield's "Been Around the World" before they would go off the air. And I mean, I just remember that song was already imprinted in my head. And then to find out, to see her on Showtime at the Apollo, where she really showed out and had the
audience was
rocking with her. I mean, really rocking with her, and was like, that song is a solidified R&B staple fresh out of the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to, I wanted to acknowledge Mark and be like, yes, I see you. I acknowledge Lisa Stansfield. Lisa is definitely that girl, and Been Around the World is definitely that girl. And also, see, again,
I know,
weren't we talking about not so much Kathy Dennis, but we were talking about D-Mob, the man behind Kathy Dennis, and that man was responsible for a lot of hits out of the UK.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many people that are influencing Black music out of the UK that I don't even know if we have enough time to talk about.
We don't even, everybody. I know, right? We definitely want to talk about some of the hip hop stuff, but I feel like we definitely need a multi-part to this, because there's the whole early 90s influx of R&B and soul in the UK that changed hip hop and everything that we don't even have time to talk about. So
yeah. Oh boy. God, you guys, you know what? Just like J. Ray said, we're just gonna have to do an extension of this show with our guest Jason Randall Smith.
Yes.
This is Q Points. I'm DJ Sir Daniel.
I'm J. Ray.
We're still dropping the needle on Black music history. Come right back after this break. It's Q Points Podcast. We'll be right back.
This is They Reminisce Over You. I'm Miguel.
And I'm Christina.
They Reminisce Over You is a podcast that celebrates and honors the best in music, movies, and TV from the past.
We get into the careers and legacies of some of the biggest names in hip-hop, R&B, and pop culture. From discussing the groundbreaking music of Missy Elliott and Mary J. Blige,
to exploring iconic moments in TV and film like the chaos at the 95 Source Awards. They Reminisce Over You has something for everyone.
So join us as we reminisce over the artists, movies, and TV shows that have shaped our lives and continue to influence popular culture today.
We are back. It's the Q Points Podcast, dropping the needle on Black music history. Shout out to our Canadian cousins, They Reminisce Over You podcast. And we are back with our very special guest, Jason Randall Smith. I am so excited to talk about this next segment, you guys, because we have been discussing the influx of British UK soul music that we have taken in over decades and decades as lovers of music, and how influential they have been on us. And did I share with you all why I feel like I have such a connection to the British scene and everything? Okay, I'm gonna make this real quick. I had an affinity for all things Disney as a kid, and Peter Pan was my favorite movie, my favorite cartoon. And I was obsessed with the Darling Children flying through the British skyline. And so since then, I was all about going to Britain, going to London and seeing all of these things in the UK. And one of my all-time dream gigs is to go over there and spin vinyl and do all of that good stuff. But I had such a love. Remember Danger Mouse? Anybody remember Danger Mouse, the cartoon, super grand, the Benny Hill show. So your boy was like super into anything that came out of the UK and was British. And that did not stop there. It leaked into the music. It leaked into rap. It leaked into my hip hop, because like some people at first, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I didn't really hear a whole lot of UK or British rap in the mid 80s, but they definitely had a scene, and it was wildly influenced, of course, by the United States, because they were really emulating a lot of stuff that was going on over here. But I'm curious, Jason, when did you get connected to the idea of UK hip hop? What kind of anchored you in, or got you hook, line, and sinker?
Where UK hip hop is concerned, I think really for me it kind of came later. I got hints, I got hints of it over the years, and early on as I was listening to hip hop. I mean, clearly we're going to talk about the importance of Slick Rick, clearly. So
Absolutely.
ultimately it's, Lottie Dottie in the show that introduced me to a figure like Ricky Walters. And so that's really the first time I'm hearing the timbre, the tone, the accent, and the smoothness of someone like Slick Rick the Ruler. Later on down the line, I would hear, I would hear some other things in terms of MCs. I think the ones that really hit me are kind of outside of the time frame that we're looking at. It's outside of that. It's outside of that 80s, mid 90s period where I'm really going deeper into what's happening across the pond. Who are all these people that are cropping up? One of the things that I did finally get around to watching is that documentary Bad Meaning Good. Came out in 1987. Tim Westwood would have done it, and it shows a number of key figures within London's hip hop scene at the time. It would have been London Posse, We Papa Girls, they pop up in it. Cookie Crew pops up in it. And it was just really interesting to see how they were reacting to the music that they were hearing that was coming from the States, and where they found themselves as UK MCs within it. Because they did show a little bit of, Run DMC going overseas and rocking the house in the UK. And it's a brief documentary. It's only about 30 minutes, but it gives you enough to figure out what was happening mid to late 1980s during that period.
Yeah. I think I'm similar to you, Jason, in that I ended up going back in time to discover many UK rappers after kind of the mid 90s period, where I felt like I was really familiar, like where I felt like the scene had started to show up more here in the United States. So then it forced me to, and then with the advent of the internet, I got a chance to like, okay, let me search for like some other people. So for instance, London Posse is one of those names. I see Mark in the chat has mentioned like folks like Derek B. Hard Noise
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with. So I'm gonna have to look up Hard Noise. Thank you for that shout out, Mark. But I would get sprinkles. So of course I remember We Papa Girl rappers. I remember the Cookie Crew. And but to that point of hearing the cadence and all of that, it was definitely Slick Rick, right? You know what I'm saying? Who it was like the first time, and I don't know that I had a concept of what exactly was happening when I heard Lottie Dottie at the show, but then it was like, oh no, it's because he's, you know, he has an accent and, you know, he's rapping, and the whole flavor was different. But yeah, I remember the sprinkles of it when I was younger, but I remember it was like the mid to late 90s when I finally went back and started to like go and find some folks.
And you know, when we speak on Slick Rick, we gotta acknowledge how he influenced the sounds of a lot of other people. Like you have Dana Dane to this day, who was his partner in rhyme at one point, will tell you that Slick Rick influenced his flow, influenced him to have an affect of a London accent, because that was super cool to have an accent, you know, and be real smooth with it and slick with it. But I think we can't discuss UK hip hop without talking about the importance of the Fresh Fest, because Jason, you mentioned about the documentary. I think I've seen parts of that documentary. That documentary chronicled how the Fresh Fest would come over to the UK, and they would bring people like African Bombada over, and people like the Cookie Crew they would talk to them and say, hey, we're going to give you 10 minutes to open. You know, you had Public Enemy coming over there and saying and giving people like them moments to open up for them. And so I think we've talked about the importance of the Fresh Fest before on one of our episodes, but like that was one of the first major hip hop tours, period. And then it went overseas. So a lot of what the flavor was brought over to the UK via the Fresh Fest. And let's just, you know, I think, Jerry, it's time that we bring in a moment. I don't think people understand how important you are, because you got one of Great Britain's most famous imports, Monie Love. You got Monie Love to actually on camera with you rap a verse to one of her most important songs. And I think we need to go ahead and share that with our Q Points audience right quick.
Let's share this, and we're going to talk about this because I have a whole Monie Love story. Ladies and gentlemen, mom and dad specifically.
Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad.
This is Monie Love of the infamous Monie in the Middle. This is her.
The very one.
This is her.
And if you don't believe it, I'll prove it. Excuse me, but I think I'm about to get into precisely what I am about to do. I'm compensating to the folks who have no whatsoever clue. So listen very carefully as I break it down for you. Merrily, 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 hyper, happy, overjoyed. Please, with all the beats around, let's just have a play. Cooking smooth, flowing down the sound, totally a yes. Let me state the position. Ladies first, yes? Yes.
Thank you.
I to this day I still don't believe
Unbelievable.
that happened, but that was a moment.
That was so much fun. Monie Love was having a conversation on stage. I believe, was that with DJ Kemet? Am I making that up? It was
Fahamu. It was
Fahamu. Yes, with Fahamu Peku. Shout out to Dr. Fahamu Peku, by the way, and shout out to Monie Love. So one of the fun stories in my history is I was part of a group that won a talent show, and we won the talent show by performing Monie in the Middle. So I was one of the dancers,
Yes.
And this is all recorded. It's a whole thing. It was an award-winning performance of 8th graders and my brother. My brother was in it too. He was in like 4th grade, and but he was really like, he was up in the front. So you had the little kid up in the front. That was like a thing that you did, because it got everybody hype. But anyway, Monie Love, and I remember seeing the Monie in the Middle video. And that was interesting to me because I remember that video had like a really interesting look. And I understood kind of the concept of like a Londoner who rapped. But the interesting thing about Monie is she sounded like a rapper from here. Like it wasn't until she spoke and I saw an interview with her, I was like, oh, she's from the UK, because she didn't rap with the same accent. But yeah, fond memories of Monie Love. Monie Love and that first record, Down to Earth, was really important. And just her guest appearances, just an important MC, and I feel like opened a lot of doors for the States to see London MCs from the UK as like viable and important.
Yeah, her just Monie, to your point, to Monie's long-standing power here in the United States is all due to everything that you just spoke about. Yes, she's from the UK, but she spent a lot of time in Brooklyn. She spent a lot of time. She went to high school with MC Lyte. That video, the Monie in the Middle video, was shot in Brooklyn, so she's got all that influence there, and she's spoken on that, how being around that environment kind of influenced her rapping dialect, the rapping without an accent, I should say. But she was so connected to the United States hip hop scene. Like, not only is she in the native tongue, but she's also a member of Ice-T's Rhyme Syndicate,
right?
Which a lot of people forget.
I forgot about that. You're right.
She was a member of Ice-T's Rhyme Syndicate. So Monie Love, literally, she took her passport and made her way over here and really created this lane for herself within the culture of hip hop right here in the United States. And she's still, I mean, the fact that her and La created Ladies First and is an anthem that still rings off to this day. I mean, that is what you call lightning in a bottle.
Yes. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, she told that story. I think it was during that interview of, just her and Latifah sitting in like different corners of like this room, writing their lyrics, right? And then coming back to each other and like, oh my God, so here's what da 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 da. And just listening to that energy, like the love that they poured into wanting this to be what Ladies First ultimately became, is huge. And so yeah, Monie in the Middle is one of those UK hip hop pioneers that we need to keep talking about her and make sure that her name stays top of mind, because she opened a lot of doors.
She absolutely did. And I think we've mentioned them briefly, but I can't not talk about the Cookie Crew real quick. The Cookie Crew, if you talk about, I think Monie Love will tell you the Cookie Crew was a major influence, and they were all part of the scene over in the United Kingdom. And that album, first of all, Daddy-O pretty much executive produced. Daddy-O of Stetsasonic produced that album. And so I think for them, for their major United States debut, for them to have the cosign of Daddy-O, Boogie Down Productions, all those heavy hitters, is something that was major. They were on a major label. Gosh, it's escaping me right. I think it was a London imprint, but it had
it was London Records, but it was the
Polygram, FFR, Polygram. It was a Polygram. It was a Polygram subsidiary, which I think allowed them to have access to the United States. Again, Jason, we were talking about Ralph McDaniels. Ralph McDaniels gave them, the Cookie Crew, like a whole hour. Because you remember on Fridays was straight up rap, straight up hip hop on Fridays on Video Music Box. And I remember him giving the Cookie Crew, like, walking with them through Harlem and giving the Cookie Crew a whole show to talk about what's going on over in the United Kingdom and hip hop. And that never left me. That album, solid. That Black is the Word album, crazy, culturally significant, because we were at that shift in hip hop culture where we were starting to really delve into Black nationalism and what it meant to be Black, and to know that we were crying out against apartheid here in the United States, but our brothers and sisters in the United Kingdom were doing the same and even louder. Like, they were blacker and prouder than we were at some points, you know. And they put that on wax in everywhere they represented. Remember how they represented in their colorful it was like custom made, not kente, but it was a different, it was a very African inspired look that they came across here with. And so we can't not talk about the Cookie Crew. I know that Remedy is she's an executive over there. She's a heavy hitter in the music scene, still in the UK. I follow her on Instagram. But can't not talk about the Cookie Crew and their influence. And Jason, we were talking about the artists that innovated and then influenced American hip hop sounds. Next week when we start talking about trip hop and dub and those things, you were talking about the 90s. That's when we get people like a Ronnie Size, and who completely flips everything on the head, and we get that ragga type beat, ragga type rapping as well. What are you looking forward most to talking about when we get into that conversation about the trip hop and the UK influence on that?
Really, in terms of that, what we see happening with trip hop and with drum and bass as well, we're basically seeing the precursors for what would become international beat culture.
Yep.
That's ultimately those are the foundational building blocks. When you have labels like Mowax, Ninja Tune, who were just running things at that period, like running things, particularly in terms of trip hop's heyday, like those two labels, like I was looking at them and constantly listening to their output, but what they were doing in terms of these abstract, surreal musical landscapes, it basically lays the groundwork for where we would ultimately end up in terms of international beat culture. This is where you really start seeing and hearing the worlds of hip hop and electronic music talking to each other, sitting down, trading notes. And what comes out of that is really some really beautiful, compelling music. Stuff that makes you have to kind of forget everything that you thought you knew about hip hop, because it was definitely taking you someplace else. It was taking you to a nocturnal place. It was taking you to a cerebral place. And sometimes it was taking you to a place that painted a very, very vivid picture without having to say a word.
Ooh, you are absolutely speaking the truth, because it's interesting. I remember understanding how important this conversation was and those conversations that the music began to have. I remember watching an interview with Bahamadia. So this is probably like 95, 96. And the interviewer asked her something to the effect of like, what's your favorite? Like, what are you listening to? And she was like, Portishead's Dummy. Like, point blank, period. And I was like, oh, yeah. Like, we are at that point where American rappers are now having these conversations. Like, this, now the UK is starting. One, they were being influenced by us over here. And then now we start and then they start influencing what we were doing. So this is an important conversation. So for everybody who listens to this show, make sure that you listen to the show after this, because we're going to continue some dialogue and dive a little bit deeper and jump into some drum and bass and to some trip hop stuff. I was listening to like So Much Massive Attack on the plane the other day. My God, that stuff is so crazy. I was like, this is crazy good. So yeah, super excited about that. And we're definitely looking forward to it. Jason, once again, let folks know, where can folks connect with you and Radio BSOTS?
Website's going to be bsots.com. It's BSOTS.com. Hanging out on the socials, you can find me across Twitter, now known as X, Facebook, and Instagram, simply at BSOTS on all of those platforms. And for those of y'all who spend as much time as I do on Mixcloud, please see about your boy over there. Mixcloud.com/Macedonia, Mixcloud.com/Jason Randall Smith.
All right, Passport Bros, listen, you've been warned. You need to come back to the next episode of Q Points and enjoy some more of this conversation about what's happening across the pond music-wise. We've talked about the foundation, we've talked about the past, but we've got a lot of great more conversation to discuss. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Jason, thank you so much for being a part of this episode of Q Points. You have like really added some shine and sheen to what we do over here, and like have really put us up to another echelon. So we appreciate you for being a part of the show. J-Ray, let the people know how they can continue to follow us on with Q Points.
Yeah. So y'all, wherever you are listening to the show, make sure that you hit subscribe. And I didn't say this earlier, but share the show with your friends, right? So if you like Q Points, chances are you have friends, family, colleagues, co-workers, doctors. I told you my doctor now listens to Q Points because I talked about the show. Share it with them. Let them know about it because they might get into it. If you want to support us as well in another way, monetarily, you can do so by becoming a member on our website at qpoints.com. Just clicking the subscribe button. Another free way that you can support us is by joining our newsletter, which is really dope. We'll probably have some really dope stuff in the newsletter as it relates to these topics that we're talking about. So you need to, because there's so much stuff that we didn't get a chance to get into. It's going to be perfect for the newsletter. And last but not least, shop our store.qpoints.com.
Well, for the Q Points podcast, I am DJ Sir Daniel.
My name is J-Ray, and that's Jason Randall Smith.
And you've been listening to the Q Points podcast, dropping the needle on Black music history. J-Ray, what do I always say in this life? You have a choice. You can either pick up the needle or you can let the record play. This has been Q Points podcast, dropping the needle on Black music history. We'll see you on the next go round. Peace.
Peace.